Well, I've been a fan of Bobby Goldsboro for a very long time indeed, and he's a man I've never had the pleasure of interviewing before. That is until now, because I'm delighted to say he's on the end of the phone at the moment. So, Bobby, a warm welcome to the programme, and welcome to Scotland.
Thank you so much. I've never been there, and I've got friends who go over all the time, and I said I've got to get over there, and all they do is talk about how gorgeous it is. So I can't wait to get over there.
Well, everybody knows Honey, of course, and everybody knows Summer the First Time, and I guess you have a very, very soft spot for those two songs in particular.
Yes, I do. In fact, it's a funny thing. My daughter, several years ago, went to Europe and with a friend of hers, and they were on a train, and they were going through Scotland. They were sitting across from two guys who were listening to their headsets, and my daughter asked who they were listening to, and he said, "I'm listening to my favorite song. It's called Summer the First Time." And she said, "Oh my God, that's my dad." You know, so I said, it's a small world. She was in Scotland and listening to Summer the First Time.
But of course, I mean, those two songs, they describe Bobby Goldsboro, don't they? I mean, sometimes for some artists, of course, it can almost be like an albatross round their neck. But you obviously see it in a completely different way.
Well, those are the songs that pretty much are the reason I'm still out there today, and I was very fortunate to get Honey because so many people think that I wrote that, but it was actually written by a good friend, Bobby Russell, who also wrote Little Green Apples. He was a great writer and a great friend who passed away a few years ago, but I've always been asked what my favorite song that I ever wrote was, and I think the best song that I've ever written was Summer the First Time, and I of all the songs I've probably written 1,000 songs, but that's the one that to me stands out of the songs that I've written.
Now, of course, we'll be talking about those two in depth a little bit later on, but you were born in Florida, weren't you? 70 years ago. I can't believe that.
Me either. But I was born in a little place called Marianna, Florida, which is in northwest Florida, and in fact, my wife and I have been living in Florida for the last 25 years. I lived in Nashville for years when I was recording and lived out in Los Angeles for a while, but was born in Florida and still live here. Do
you feel 70? You certainly don't sound it.
No, I don't. I honestly don't. Some mornings I wake up and I feel 90. But to tell you the truth, I go out when I'm doing concerts or doing art shows and traveling. I honestly feel like I'm in my 40s. I don't think about age. I'm never dwelled on that too much, and just occasionally it'll hit me that I'm 70 years old. And I remember when I was much younger, I thought 70 was next, you're ready for the grave. And now at 70, I feel like hopefully I've got a long way to go.
Well, that's fantastic news. And we certainly won't dwell on the fact that you're 70. But in fact, we'll go back to your childhood because you became a guitarist and you started writing songs and obviously singing as well. So was music very much part of your life early on?
Well, you know what? I think it was without me knowing it, because I wanted to play Major League Baseball when I was a little kid, like, most kids growing up in America, they want to play baseball or football or something. But I would hear a song, and even without meaning to, I could hear that song a year later, and I could remember what all the violin parts were, what all the background singers were doing, what the bass lines were. And at the time, I really had no interest in music, but it was just something that kind of came natural to me. And as I got into high school, I got a guitar as a gift, and I learned how to play it myself. Well, I didn't have any books or anything, so I learned how to play it myself. And as a result, to this day, I still can't read music. And I've written 1,000 songs and arranged them and everything else, and I've done music for television shows and movies and all that. But I play by ear, and I mean, there are a lot of people who do that. But I think the music is something that was just with me when I was born, and I didn't even know it.
As you say, I mean, your songs are peppered with the most wonderful arrangements.
Well, the thing is, I've always tried to explain it that when I write a song, the arrangement is part of the song. I hear, when I get through writing the song, I already know I know what it's going to sound like. I know what the violins are going to do. I know what I want the background voices to do, the piano lines or the bass lines, all of those things are part to me of the song, not just the arrangement. So when on the songs that I've written over the years, the arrangements were to me just part of the song and not so much the arrangement.
Now, your first big break, Bobby, was probably as guitarist for Roy Orbison. Would that be right?
It was, by far. Roy was coming through the area. I was in college, my second year of college at Auburn University, and Roy had just fired his band because he caught him drinking, and he didn't allow that. And so we got a call from a promoter, and they wanted to know if we wanted to back up Roy Orbison for 4 nights. And I'm thinking, Roy Orbison, are you kidding me? We can back him. And it wasn't that we were such a good band. We were the only band in the area. learned his songs as best four guys could because he had all these big arrangements and violins and all that. And we learned his songs as best we could. And after the 4 nights, after opening night, after the first night we worked together, Roy and I were like brothers. We were just laughing and joking and just hit it off. And after the 4 dates that we worked together, he asked me if we'd like to go on the road as his band. And I went out and played guitar for Roy for almost 3 years and never went back to school.
Of course, a lot of people think of you, Honey, Summer the First Time, Hello Summertime, a lot of ballads in there. But really, I suppose you were a frustrated rock and roll singer.
Well, when I started out, I actually was doing, when I would go out to do in fact, the first big top 10 record I had in the United States was a ballad called See the Funny Little Clown, but that was about the only ballad that I was doing on stage. The rest of the stuff was blues and rock and roll, and as a matter of fact, I opened up for the Rolling Stones on their first concert tour over here. It sounds strange to think that Bobby Goldsboro singing Honey and Summer the First Time opened for the Stones. Well, I wasn't singing Honey and Summer at the time in my career.
And, of course, it wasn't just the Stones. I believe you backed or you were support for the Beatles, and you even played with Elvis Presley at Houston, didn't you?
Well, I didn't work with Elvis, but I got to know him, and we flew together on a flight out to L.A. a couple of times, and I went to his concert, one of his concerts in Las Vegas, and he had him put the spotlight on me in the audience, and he was a nice guy. But the Beatles, I came over with Orbison for the big tour, and Roy was actually going to headline the tour, and this unknown band called the Beatles were going to be on there, and it was booked like 6 or 8 months in advance, and by the time we got to England, the Beatles were the biggest thing in the world, so they really didn't know what to do about who was going to close the show, because Roy had never played England before, and he was so big over there, so they had Roy close the first half of the show, and the Beatles close the second half, and it was just pandemonium every night, just screaming, from the time the people got in the auditoriums until they left, but even with all of that and with the excitement of the Beatles, Roy would do 2 or 3 encores every night. That's how much they loved him over there.
Fantastic. And when did you start coming out of the shadow of Roy Orbison and then moving into your own career, effectively?
Well, the thing is, when I was going to Auburn, during my second year, the little band I was in, we were going to Birmingham, Alabama on the weekends and on holidays, and we were recording some songs in a little studio and sleeping on the floor because we couldn't afford to get a hotel room, so we'd sleep on the floor of the studio, and we'd get up the next day and record some songs that I had written. And those songs were actually sent to New York, and I had actually signed a contract right before we got with Orbison, and the guy, his name was Jack Gold, record producer, and he said he was going to find a hit song for me and bring me to New York. Well, I didn't hear from him for a year, and during that next year is when I was on the road with Orbison. So I actually stayed with Roy for 3 years, and I finally had cut, during the time, Roy had taken some time off to write, and I went to New York and recorded See the Funny Little Clown, and when it came out and made the national charts is when I was still over in England on the Beatles tour. And I sat up with Orbison one night till 3 in the morning talking about it. I said, well, they want me to come over there and start doing television and concerts, and I don't know if I want to do that or not. And he said, why don't you give it a shot as a single and see how you like it, and if you don't like being out there on your own, you can always come back and play guitar for me. That's the kind of guy he was. So after the Beatles tour, I came back and started doing all the TV shows and the record hops and things that they were doing at the time, and decided I was going to stay with it.
And did you see yourself first and foremost as a writer or as a performer or both?
I'm a better writer than anything else. I've always felt like I could. I always thought that my whole career. I said if the next record doesn't make it and I don't have any more hits, I think I can always write songs, and I would be happy doing that. And that's the one thing that I've never clamored for is the limelight and the applause. I mean, it's great. I mean, there's no getting around it. You love it when you do a song and people love to hear it and applaud. But I can live without that. When somebody records a song that I've written, and that's the most flattering thing anybody can do, I think, is because they think a song that I've written is good enough for them to record, and that I think that I get more pleasure out of that than singing a hit. And
it's really a who's who of music who have actually recorded your material. I mean, do you have a favourite cover of your own songs?
Well, boy, it's hard to say. I loved Bette Midler in a movie did Summer the First Time in the Divine Miss M movie that she did, and it was just an incredible version of it, and I get a great feeling when I hear somebody do a song of mine completely different. I had a Johnny Cash did a song of mine for a television special one time, and it was a thing that I had written that had a pretty intricate melody, a lot of highs and lows, and he pretty much sang it. He left out most of the melody, but it was so great because it was Johnny coming out of Johnny Cash. So So things like that are just the things I look back on my career, and I think I had a song recorded by Johnny Cash or Bette Midler or John Denver, people like this, and got to know these people, and so I've been very blessed my whole career.
And interestingly enough, you're talking about different versions of your songs, but I've heard you today in the car singing "He'll Have to Go," and that was so different to Jim Reeves.
Oh yeah, well that's something I had. I just came up with that one day. I was in the car. I've done a lot of my writing and arranging and stuff like that, and driving in the car sometimes. And I was just started thinking of that song, and I started putting a rhythm to it. And I said, this could be done totally different than the way Jim Reeves did it. So I went in and cut it, and I wrote a little part for the background singers to do, and that was a fun one to do.
I'll bet it was. I mean, it sounded great, and I've never heard a version of "He'll Have to Go" anything like it before, and it really was refreshing.
And
it was
you may
great.
never hear another one like that.
Let's go to the year 1968. You know what's coming here, of course. The year, I suppose, that changed your life, because Honey was, I think I'm right in saying it was the number one song of that year, the biggest selling record of that year.
It was the largest selling record in the world in '68, and it's funny that. One of the channels over here, VH1, on television channels, they do documentaries all the time, and they did a documentary one night, and I watched it, and it was all about 1968. It was all the political turmoil and the music that was going on, and they completely left out Honey because it didn't fit with what they were talking about. So I'm thinking, well, that's kind of odd. It was the biggest selling record in the world, but it just didn't fit in what they were trying to say in the documentary, so they just conveniently left it out. but the thing is, up until that song, I had a lot of hit records over here and a lot of cover hits over in England, but I was pretty much just kind of living from record to record, and if I had a hit, I got booked a lot more than I did if I didn't have a hit. And Honey was the kind of song that all of a sudden it can make a career. It got me a lot of television shows that I had never done before, all the talk shows, like The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and there were so many talk shows over here at the time, Dinah Shore and David Frost and Merv Griffin, people like that. And I started getting to do those shows because of that song. It reached a completely different audience than I had reached before. So that song, by far, did more for my career than anything I've ever recorded.
And it's a lovely story behind it all, because it was originally written, I believe, for Bob Shane. There's another Bobby there.
Bob Shane's record was out for about 2 weeks before mine came out. And I'm not trying to be modest, but I honestly believe if he had sung on my record and I had sung on his, he would have had the hit, because of the arrangement that a guy named Don Tweedy wrote that arrangement for Honey. With the high voice and the string lines and the very simple arrangement, and where you could really take in the lyrics. And I think Bob Shane's record was overproduced. It had a lot of drums and a lot of stuff that just kind of took away from the song. So I think I was fortunate to have the better record. Not that I sang it better than him, but I had the better record, and that I was very fortunate.
And it was all done in one take, wasn't it?
It was. And that was back then. Sounds like the ancient days, but back in the '60s. Back in the '68, you recorded everything together. You wouldn't go in and cut a rhythm track and then go add the piano and then go add the violins and things like they do now. We had the full orchestra in there, and we ran through it a couple of times, and we recorded it. And after the first take, we went in to listen to the playback, and a lot of the musicians even came back to the control room to listen to the playback, and they don't normally do that. We said, wow. I remember a violin player, first chair violinist, I think you call him, I guess. I'm still learning those terms. But anyway, I remember he said, that's the number one record. And everybody just kind of nodded. And I thought, boy, it really does sound great. So I said, well, let's go cut it again and do it even better. So we went out and did another take, and it sounded just like the first one. So we ended up taking the first take, and we called Bobby Russell from the studio and said, we've just I think we've cut a monster with this thing, and what do we do? And he said, well, give us 2 weeks with the Bob Shane record, and if nothing happens, come out with yours. And so the record company, which they really didn't have to wait, once another record was out, you could come out with it, but I got the record company to wait exactly 2 weeks, and they shipped mine, and fortunately I had the hit with it.
Bob Shane, obviously, it was written for. It was written by Bobby Russell. Bobby Montgomery produced it. Bobby Goldsboro recorded it. What was it about the Bobs in those days?
I don't know. There were a lot of them. There were also, in fact, at the time, there was Bobby V, Bobby Vinton. There were a lot of other Bobbies, and Bobby Sherman, so...
Now, you're going to tell me the girl who sung that wonderful angelic harmony, her name wasn't Bobby, was it?
No, it wasn't.
Well, thank goodness for that.
But her name was Millie. Her name was Millie, and she was a fantastic singer. She sang on all the hits that came out of Nashville at the time. Everybody from Elvis to me. I mean, she was a great singer, and we always tried to get certain musicians for the recording sessions, because there were certain guys that you knew. If this is a rhythm thing, you want a certain guy on bass, and if this is a ballad, we want those string players there. So that's the way it was, and she was the boy, and she was picked by the arranger, Don Tweedy again. He's the one that came up with that, having her way up high do that, and that angelic sound, and that to me made the record.
I mean, even now it sounds so fresh, doesn't it?
It does. I recently heard it we were in the car, and it came on the radio. Just after I turned the radio on, all of a sudden that started playing, and I thought, is this a CD I had in there or something? And it did. It just, I was back in '68, and it was, and it sounded like it could have been recorded yesterday. Absolutely.
Now, it was number one for 4 weeks, I think, in America, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. There were 4 million sellers that never made it to number one because of Honey. I think Aretha Franklin had one. The Box Tops had The Letter, and it didn't make number one. I think the Union Gap, Gary Puckett and the Union Gap got to number 2, and there was in one other record, I think. But there were a lot of great records out at the time, and I was just fortunate to get that one at the right. It was one of those kind that I was there at the right time at the right place.
But in Britain, of course, it was the other way around, wasn't it? Because you were stuck at number 2, not once, but twice. And that must make Honey the most unlucky record in chart history in Britain, because you were number 2 twice, and that's never happened before, or since.
Well, it's the way I looked at it, I said, if I even get in the top 20, I'm happy, and then it would make top 10, well, I'm even happier. And so to get to number 2 and not make number 1, to me, it doesn't bother me at all. I'm very happy with number 2.
Can you remember the reason why it was reissued 7 years later in Britain?
I remember they ran what it was, I remember getting a call from somebody at the record company, which was United Artists at the time. They called me and they said that the BBC had had a contest, said vote for your favorite all-time ballad. And Honey won by such an overwhelming majority that people were requesting it so much that the record company decided to release it again, and it became a hit again. That was told to me by the guy at the record company.
Right, because, a lot of the times some quirky something happens, doesn't it, and a record is reissued, whether it's part of an advert, and of course we'll talk about your advert song, Hello Summertime, with Coca-Cola a little bit later on. But Honey, I suppose, broke you into the country music scene as well in quite a big way.
Yeah, it's funny that being from the South, and I had never been played on country radio until Honey. So when Honey came out and was an instant hit on country radio, and I was like a new artist there, and I'd been having hit records for 4 years before that in pop music and doing television and American Bandstand and shows like that, but I had never done anything associated with country music. And the fact that it went to number 1, the album also went to number 1 country. So I had a whole new audience, and I was like a new artist. They had never heard of me until then. So it was incredible time, because every time I would release a record after that, I got played pop and I got played country, which had really up until then had not happened.
And very interestingly enough as well, on this same album that I heard you do a cover of He'll Have to Go, you've got Goodbye Marie, which I think, was it Mel McDaniel co-wrote that? Was it Mel McDaniel?
I think, yeah, he did. In fact, Larry Butler was producing me at the time, and Larry had been he cut all the Kenny Rogers big hits with all the big hits that Kenny did, The Gambler and everything. And Larry was an old friend. Larry had played piano for me on the road for a couple of years before he got into producing, and then it turned out to be the number 1 producer in the world there for a while. And he produced this album, and he came to me with this song called Goodbye Marie and played it, and I loved it, and we cut it.
So did you do it before Kenny, or did Kenny do it first?
I'm really not sure. I think Kenny may have done it for an album.
It was certainly a single in the UK, but in America, obviously, markets work in a different way. But it was a hit single, I believe, in the UK. But interestingly enough, as well, there's a song of yours which you wrote called "Lucy and the Stranger," which I love, and that is very Kenny Rogers-esque.
It is. In fact, Larry produced that, but that's one that I wrote. It's probably the weirdest. It's about a serial killer, basically. And that's one thing that. That's the one thing that my whole career as a writer, that's the great thing about writing. It's kind of like a novelist. You can be anybody you want to be in a song. You can write about anything, and that's what I've done my whole career. And I don't know that many people have written about serial killings, but I got a lot of feedback on that, mostly positive. People liked it. It was a strange. I think it would make a good movie.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, very tongue-in-cheek, but similar, as I say, like The Gambler and Coward of the County, which I believe both went on to become movies.
Yeah, they did. So maybe there's a movie down the road here.
How about that? So there we are. You've certainly cornered the market, I think, in serial killer songs. Well, let's talk about something which has got nothing to do with serial killing. And this was your next biggest hit, Summer the First Time, song which you wrote, played frequently all over the world, and voted, I think, the greatest ever summer song in yet another of these surveys which keep coming out. But as I say, you wrote that. I mean, you know what I'm going to ask you. I'm going to say, is it autobiographical? And you're going to tell me, mind your own business.
Well, you know what? The funny thing is, to tell you the truth, it's loosely based on something that happened to me, but it just wasn't nearly as romantic as I made it in the song.
Okay, tell us a true story. Tell us a true story.
Well, it happened, the ages were even, they weren't as close as I even had them in the song, and I was, let's just say that it wasn't as romantic as I made it. Okay.
But a great song. And I mean, everything, the arrangement, the piano. Now, tell me about the piano, because that little riff in there, and also right at the end where the keyboard comes down the scale, I mean, it's just a piece of magic.
I have to tell you, of all the songs I ever recorded, that I ever wrote, I finally had one, I honestly mean this, Summer the First Time, from beginning to end, everything on there is what I had heard in my head, with the exception of the piano lick, and that was Tim Tappan, my piano conductor. And he came. I was standing backstage at the Tonight Show, and I had just written the first verse of this song, and I said, "We're waiting backstage. They're doing a commercial." And I said, "Listen to this. I just started writing this," and I did the opening guitar part on the 12-string. And after the first time through, he went da 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 on the piano. I said, "Don't forget that." I said, "Do that every time I come back to that lick," and he did. And I said, "Good night." I said, "After the show, I got to sit down. I don't want to forget that." And then at the very end of the song, I asked him. I said, "Can you do anything coming down on the piano?" He came up with that, the rundown on the piano at the very end, which was just, to me, was as magical as the intro part. Everything else on there came out of my head, but those two good piano licks, to me, made the whole thing.
And the introduction, the recording of, you can hear the seagulls, you can hear the waves crashing into the beach.
Yeah, well, the thing is, when I went into the head of the record company to play this, because it was, I think it was nearly 4 minutes long, or back then you had to try to keep everything under 3 minutes to get enough airplay, otherwise they wouldn't play it half the time. I walked in and played it for the head of the record company, and he said, "This is the best record you've ever made. Now we'll take that intro out and we'll take that instrumental in the middle and we can cut it down to 2.5." I said, "You can't do that. You cannot do." I said, "If you take that out, it's like having a book. If you can take out chapter 1 and chapter 12. You can't do that just to shorten the book. You need chapter 1 in the middle of the book. You got to have that too." And I convinced him to leave the seagulls and the ocean crashes in there. And I think had we not done it, it would have been a so-so record.
Did you actually record that yourself, the beach sounds?
We had a sound effects, ocean sound effects thing, and I went through everything I had till I found the one that I thought was just right, with the space between the crashes and all of that, and then we put it on there. And then I went through the whole thing at the beginning, timed it out with the seagulls before I came in with the first little piano thing.
And I guess people over the years have come up to you and said, "Look, you painted a picture that reflected an experience that I went through."
Well, they have. I get that all the time. I get emails and letters from people that just say that song was special to them, and it even though I know it didn't happen like that for everybody, it's something that eventually happens to most people, and it's a memory that'll stay with you the rest of your life. And I tried to write the song where nobody was going to be offended by anything, but there were several stations over here in the United States that wouldn't play the song. They said it was too risque. You can play it on Disney Channel now, I think.
Times they have changed, that's for sure.
They have.
Now, Honey, of course, was a tearjerker, and so was one of my favourites, Butterfly for Bucky, which I saw you perform on Top of the Pops. They're doing reruns over here on the BBC at the moment, and your version of Butterfly for Bucky when Noel Edmonds was presenting Top of the Pops was on there. I mean, goodness me, that's a tearjerker.
Well, that's a song that it was actually. I got a letter from a fellow. I used to go through the mail and look at songs. People would send songs, and usually they just weren't that good. But I got this poem, and it was a long, long poem, probably 10 pages long. But the more I read it, I said, "What a great story this is!" And I ended up calling the guy, and he said it was actually a true story. I said, "What do you mean it's a true story?" He said he knew the guy that this had happened to. His son. Supposedly, the doctors could not find out why the kid could not see. He was blind, and they tried everything. They even tried an operation, and they said, "There's nothing we can do." And during the time he was in the hospital, the butterfly, he loved butterflies, and one landed on the windowsill, and he could see again, and they could not explain it. And I said, whether it's a true story or not, I mean, that's an incredible story. And I said, I would like to rewrite this and make this into a song, put a melody to it and rewrite the lyrics, because it was just kind of, it was almost a book the way he had written. And I said, it's got to be shortened and all that. And he said, be my guest. So I gave him co-writer on it, and we split it 50-50, and I wrote the song.
And even now, when I hear you talking about it, the old bottom lip's quivering.
When you think about it, because a lot of things happen in this world that we can't explain, and in fact, that's one of the lines in the song, but it's true. And you see things every day that people say, well, that's a miracle, or that can be explained. Well, some things you can't explain, but things happen like that, and I think it's an inspiring story, because there are a lot of people out there that need to hear things like this.
Absolutely. Now, of course, your last hit in the UK, certainly, was the theme to a Coca-Cola advert, which was Hello Summertime, written by, I think Cook and Greenaway, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that was originally, just as you say, it was a Coca-Cola commercial, and it got so much, I remember, I'll never forget the phone call I got from somebody at the record company here out in L.A., called and said, we just got a call from England, and they said, this Coca-Cola commercial you did is getting such a response that they want to know if you'll rewrite the lyrics and record it as a single. And I said, well, sure. And I rewrote it, but I didn't get any credit because the writers had already written the commercial. But I only had to change a few lines in there anyway, and it became a hit over there. So I was thrilled.
And again, a lovely bit of piano at the beginning.
That was part of the arrangement. In fact, if I remember, we recorded that in Las Vegas. I was playing a club out there. They needed the thing recorded right away, so they set up a recording session in Las Vegas, and that's where I recorded it.
Quirkily enough, songs like Honey and Some of the First Time and Butterfly for Bucky and Hello Summertime, all these things, we may never have heard had it been for one particular incident, and I think you know what I'm talking about now. You were in a rather exciting plane journey. Tell us about that, Bobby.
Well, this was it was actually, I think around 70 or 71. I used to play in a lot of pro celebrity golf tournaments. I just played a concert in Seattle, Washington. Is this the one you're talking about, the one that went to Cuba?
Could well be, unless you've got another one.
I had another one in Pittsburgh where I was in a blizzard in a single-engine plane.
Yeah, that's the one I was referring to. But
okay.
Please tell me both.
Well, I'll tell you the other one after this, right quick. But the one in Pittsburgh, we got it was me and Lou Christie and Diane Renee, who had Blue Navy Blue. She had a big hit with that. The three of us go out to get on a plane and fly down to Wheeling, West Virginia from Pittsburgh to do a record hop. And I was deathly afraid of little planes anyway, so we're going out there, and I'm thinking, well, at least we're not going to get on some little... I looked over, and I saw this tiny little plane with just one propeller, and I said, thank God to myself. I said, thank God we're not getting on that one. Well, that was the plane we got on. And it was a disc jockey who owned the plane, and another disc jockey was a co-pilot. So we hadn't been in the air 15, 20 minutes when I hear him hollering Mayday. Our pilot is hollering Mayday, and what happened, the oil line had burst on the plane, and the flaps weren't working, and the engine was cutting out, and we were over the mountains of West Virginia at night in a blizzard. So, to make a long story short, obviously we made it down, okay, but I was thinking, I was in this back little seat, and it wasn't even a fifth seat. I just had to sit back in this and huddled up in the back by the tail. and I was thinking, I wonder who's going to get top billing in the paper tomorrow, you know. but luckily we made it down. But the other story I was going to tell you, I flew from Seattle, Washington to Nashville. I flew from Seattle to Chicago and took a flight. I played in a golf tournament up in Seattle right after we did a concert. And we flew to Chicago and got a flight early in the morning to fly to Nashville. Instead of going to Nashville, I won't tell you the whole story, but bottom line is we got hijacked to Cuba. And
goodness me.
It was one of the last flights that was hijacked, and there was a guy in the back of the plane that supposedly had nitroglycerin strapped to his wrists, and he was going to slam his wrists together and blow up the plane if we didn't land in Havana. So we made it down there, and we actually made it on fumes because the pilot had sent word by the stewardess back there to tell him that we didn't have enough fuel even to get to Orlando, much less Havana. And he said, send a note back, or to send her back to say, let us refuel in Orlando, and we'll fly you on down to Havana. And he said, if we touch down anywhere but Havana, I'll blow up the plane. So what he did, he went higher than normal and coasted and preserved the fuel as best he could. And he said he does not. I was talking to him after we landed in Havana, and he said he has no idea how we made it, because he said we've been out of fuel for the last 20 minutes.
Good grief.
So once again, I won't say I was at the right place at the right time then, but it was one of those things. I've been blessed my whole life, because it could have been a different outcome.
Now, is this one of the reasons why we haven't seen you over in Britain for a while, because you just don't get on planes anymore?
We were over in Europe last year with some friends, and my wife wants to come to Britain and Scotland and Ireland, all in there, and we had to get back for something I had already booked over here. It was a couple art shows I had to do, but we're going to try to get over there in the next year, and I'd love to come over there. I really would.
Well, I've waited for decades to see you over in Britain. When was the last time you played over here?
I've never done a concert there. I used to come over and I'd do television and radio, but I've never come over to do a concert tour.
We've got to sort that out, haven't we? We have to sort that out.
I would love to do it. I think it would be a lot of fun.
Now, I must just mention about one of my favourite artists, Dave Berry and the Cruisers from Coventry. Mm-hmm. And, of course, he had a big, big hit in the 60s with Little Things, which, of course, you wrote. Yeah,
and it's funny, I had a big hit over here, and I was thinking, boy, it would be great if this would be a hit over in England too. And I got a call and they said it is a hit, but not by you. So I was fortunate that I wrote the song, but I didn't. In fact, Dave, I think, covered 2 or 3 of my songs over there. Just about every time I would record something over here, somebody over there would have a hit with it.
You see, you should come over more often and these things wouldn't happen.
There you go.
Now, another song I must ask you about, because I've got a little boy called Scott, and he was named actually after this song, which was written by Mac Davis, and watching Scotty grow.
It's a funny thing. Again, I've said so many times already that being at the right place at the right time. Well, I was in California, and I went to a clothing store to buy a shirt for a TV show I was going to do. And I looked across in this clothing store, and there was Jerry Fuller, who was I knew him pretty well. He was a record producer. He had a big hit himself back in the early 60s, and he was producing Andy Williams and a lot of people. And I went over and started talking with him. He said, I was just talking about you last week. He said, do you know Mac Davis? I said, well, I know who he is. I've never met him. And he said, well, Mac pitched a song to me to record with Andy Williams, and I didn't think the song was right for Andy. I said, that sounds like a Bobby Goldsboro song. He said, it's called Watching Scotty Grow. You should call Mac and have him play it for you. So when I got back to the hotel where I called Mac, he came over and played the song for me. I loved it and came back and recorded it. So had I not been buying a shirt that day, I would have never heard the song.
Wow. What a great story that is, and what a great song.
It's a great song. It really is.
You've mentioned it a couple of times earlier on about your paintings and your art. Now, when did you start seriously sort of taking this up? Because I've had a look on your website. It's magnificent, Bobby.
Thank you so much. Well, I thought about this for the last 30 years, and I had never tried to oil paint, but I would be out doing concerts, and my wife and I would go to a gallery or to a museum, and I'd look at the paintings, and I'd get as close to them as I could without getting shot by the guards there, trying to look at the brushwork, and I would study them, and I said, one day I'm going to give that a shot. I think I would enjoy oil painting. And I've been saying this for years, so finally my wife said, when are you going to start oil painting? You've been talking about it, and you haven't tried it. Finally I said, okay, when I turn 65, I'll start painting. So the day I turned 65, I went out and bought oil paints, brushes, canvases, and started painting. And now I'd never tried it until then, and now I've been painting a little over 5 years, and I absolutely love it. I'm out here in the studio every day that I'm not on the road, and on one hand, I wish I had started 30 years ago, but had I done that, I may not be into it like I am now. I've got the time to devote to it, and I just love it.
That's extraordinary because, I mean, it's like your music self-taught, your painting self-taught. And, I mean, that's going to give a lot of people an awful lot of hope if they think, that, oh, they love painting, they'd love to have a go, but I've never done it, it's too late now. And as you say, you started at 65. And, I mean, these paintings are just remarkable. And it's interesting because there's two kinds of art, as far as I'm concerned. There's abstract, which I don't like at all, but that's just a personal thing. And then what I really love and what I admire totally is when people can sit down and see a scene of hills and valleys and rivers, or an animal, or a butterfly, of course, which of course you've done many of, and you can just do it. And I think, to me, that is just an unbelievable talent. So how come you've got so good so quick? 5 years.
Well, I tell everybody, like I just said, I've been painting in my head for 30 years. I know it's kind of like writing a song. I know what it's going to sound like when I finish it, and I know what the painting is going to look like. My wife, one day she said, "How are you doing this? How do you know what colors to put?" And I said, "I see the color like I hear the music." That's basically what I do. I'll have artists come into an art show, and they'll really get technical. What kind of brush were you using when you did this scene here? And I said, well, it's about this long and it's shaped like this. And they'll say, it's a filbert. I said, okay, it's a filbert brush. I haven't learned the names of the paints or the brushes. I just know which ones to use, and I call them. I'll make up names for them.
Absolutely fantastic. And of course, if people want to have a little look at your artwork, they can go to your website, can't they?
Yeah, just go to bobbygoldsboro.com, and they're all on there. And I have been so blown away with what's happened with artwork. Like I said, I only started painting 5 years ago, and I've done 14 art shows. We've sold over 50 original paintings and over 200 prints of these paintings. And I've only painted 80-something paintings, and we've already sold over 50 of the originals, and some of them are huge, very large paintings. But I've got 3 or 4 art shows lined up. We're going out to the Arizona Sonoran Desert Museum and I'm doing a concert there in March, and then the next day we do an art show at their big gallery there, and it's the museum, and it's just a gorgeous facility. We flew out and looked at it back in February, and in San Francisco there's a couple of galleries in San Francisco that contacted me, and they want me to come out and do a show there next spring. So the art is just taking off, and I love doing it. I've done 3 or 4 where I do a concert one day and an art show the next day at the gallery there, and it just goes over so well because a lot of the people that come to the concerts don't even know that I paint, and I show a little 2-minute. I put together a 2-minute film and I wrote some music for it, and let them see some of the art, and the next day they just flock to the art show. So they've been very successful, so we're putting together a lot of those.
And all of this must keep you incredibly young. I mean, writer, producer, singer, painter, children's books, television shows, publishing, impressions of tree frogs as well, isn't there?
I tell you what, I don't get a lot of sleep at night because I'm always thinking of what I'm going to do the next day, and I have a lot of energy because there's so many things that I want to do, and I know there's even though I'm 70 now, I feel like I've got a long way to go. A lot of time, hopefully, got a lot of time left, so I want to make the most of it.
So what's going to happen in the next 10, 15 years or so?
Who knows?
What are you planning
10 years ago, if you'd have told me I'd be oil painting now, I would have said you're nuts. So I don't know. Something else may come along, but right now I sure love the painting and the singing, so it's fun to be able to do both.
Well, look, we've spent almost an hour on the phone, and I really appreciate your time, Bobby, because I'm sure you've gone over the old stories time and time again, but you were very happy to sort of talk about them again, and
well,
it's fantastic.
Been my pleasure, really, and anytime you want to do it, just give me a call.
Fantastic. Bobby Goldsboro, thanks very much indeed.